Good morning. I'm Pastor Kim Risedorph. Welcome to this time of worship. An extra credit for dashing in here under the raindrops. If you are new to Asbury, thank you for being here. It is our prayer that during this time of worship, we do more than talk about God, that we actively experience God's love and God's presence alive in us. And if you're familiar with Asbury, I'm grateful you're here as well. Worship would not be the same without you. And you know what your job is. Your job is to look for someone that you do not yet know by name and say hello to them before you leave today. That's how we live into being who we claim we are, a welcoming community where all feel known, welcomed, and called by name. Today I'm thinking about starting points in our lives. Starting points matter. You'll see this picture of a track race. My son sent that to us. It was a crowded start. It was a fast start. And he's the handsome dude in the blue and the white off there to the right. One misstep, and boom, right? You go flying on that at that starting point. It was so crowded and so quick. Starting points matter. Where we place our footing, where we land, determines our experience, not only in races, but in life. And the starting point in the journey of faith is baptism. Baptism is when we claim our true identity as God's beloved, and we seek to be God's love in the world. We commit to being God's love in the world when we take our baptism vows. And today we celebrate the baptism of Kylie Michelle Almeida. We offer not only our blessings that they are here, but also prayers that Kylie's baptism will be her starting point for a deeper, authentic relationship with God. And we start worship. Our starting point for worship is bringing in the light of Christ that reminds us that Christ's presence, God's love, is available to us all. As that light comes in, I invite you into a time of prayer, an inhale and an exhale, being present at this time. And I invite you to offer a prayer for Kylie on her baptism day. And as that light comes in, I invite you to send that light out into the world, to all the places where God's light and love are needed, places where there is famine, where there is violence, where there is fear. We begin worship. Our starting point for worship is in prayer. Let us worship together. And I forgot to give to the family this acknowledgement of Kylie's baptism, child of blessing, something for her nursery or for, from this congregation to your home. And we are turning up the heat. It does take a while. I know it's a little bit chilly, but we're working on that. So I hope you feel the warmth that will come from exploring this scripture. We're reading from the book of Ezekiel, in part because it's in this book that the word sanctuary is mentioned lots and lots of times. And sanctuary is our overarching theme for this season of Lent. And we're at the starting point this week for Lent. You know, there's only one other book in the Bible that outnumbers, big clue here, outnumbers Ezekiel in mentioning the word sacrament. Any guesses as to what that is? Okay. Just wanted to make sure you were awake and with it this morning. So enough Bible trivia. We're jumping right into the book of the prophet Ezekiel. It was written during one of the most tragic moments in ancient Israel's history. There was a time when the 12 nations of Israel were united as one kingdom. They had a series of kings, but after King Solomon, the king that came to power was not widely appreciated or accepted, and there was a revolt. And the kingdom split in two over this. 10 tribes went up to be the northern kingdom, 2 remained in the Jerusalem area as the southern kingdom. And you know what happens when institutions or nations split? They become weaker entities because they're so much smaller with less resources. And these two kingdoms were now about the size of the state of Connecticut. Armies invaded them and conquered them, and Ezekiel writes from his vantage point. He had been raised in the southern kingdom. When the Babylonian army came in, he and 8,000 others were exiled to Babylon. And Ezekiel spends most of his time trying to figure out why this evil thing happened. But eventually he reaches a new awareness, a new starting point for understanding what happens when we feel that God has abandoned us. He realizes that God has not, that God's covenant with us is forever. And that's where we read the words from Ezekiel this morning, this vision of what is possible because of God.
I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be over them all. Never again shall they be two nations, and never again shall they be divided into two kingdoms. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will bless them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary among them forevermore. My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Then the nations shall know that I, the Lord, sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary is among them forever.
Thank you. This vision of God's presence as God's sanctuary among us, I got to tell you, that wasn't Ezekiel's starting point. He spent the first 30-some chapters looking for someone to blame for this awful thing that had happened to his nation. His conclusion was, in the bulk of his oracles or rantings, was that it was God's will that the people suffer this because they had been bad, and God removed God's care from them, and they were to suffer exile and domination by a foreign nation. I understand sometimes where Ezekiel is coming from. When bad things happen, when we meet tragedy or pain or suffering that we can't explain, sometimes our human reasoning reaches out to the point where we say, it must be God's will. In fact, maybe you've heard that sometimes in your life when tragedy, pain, or suffering happen, where someone says, oh, it must be God's will. And if someone has ever said that to you, I'm sorry. Because it is not God's will. It is not God's intention to inflict pain, suffering, or evil. That is not God's presence, God's will, the way God works in the world. But we have these cliches that we use when we try to understand that which is beyond our understanding. Ezekiel did it, we do it. But the good news is that God doesn't leave us there. That God didn't leave Ezekiel with that understanding. What is it that allowed Ezekiel to change his mind, to see things differently? Well, it wasn't because things got better. He was upset because there were armies looting and trying to take over Jerusalem where the temple was. And the thing he most feared happened. Jerusalem fell to a foreign nation. And now the sanctuary where he found God's presence was no longer a place that he or his people could go. And it's right after that it seems Ezekiel switched from blaming people, from blaming God, to saying, well, God's sanctuary is more than one place. God's everlasting covenant is that God will dwell among us, and we will be God's people. That happened to Ezekiel. It happens in our times too. Sometimes when we face pain or suffering or evil, we find, just like Ezekiel did, that God does not abandon us. That God's will is for us to know God is with us, no matter what we face. A book some of us are reading for Lent is by Terry Hershey, Sanctuary, Creating a Place for Grace. And the author is at a convention and needs to get a haircut, and goes out, walks into a salon, someplace he'd never been before, with a person who had never cut his hair before, and has one of those random conversations that created space in his life. The woman cutting his hair was still being treated for cancer. It had surgery, chemo, and surgery again. And she said to him that while her starting point might not have been an awareness of God's presence, she said, "This experience has softened me, and now I love different. And now I look at people differently." I think that's what happens when our starting point is claiming our relationship with God. It happened to Ezekiel, it happened to Sharon, and I don't know for sure what you'll face this afternoon or in the week ahead, where you wonder where God is when you see or experience pain or fear or suffering. But the good news is that God does not abandon us. God walks alongside us. The ancient Psalms remind us that even though we walk through the darkest valleys, God is with us. It is not God's will that we experience pain or suffering or evil, nor does God abandon us in those moments. And when we sing out that truth, our starting point is just like the one we celebrated for Kylie in baptism. When we can start with claiming our identity as God's beloved, that changes how we see ourselves, how we see people, and how we love. It is a reminder that God is always present. And our next piece of music allows us to claim that truth. Today in worship, we experienced two different starting points. One was with baptism. The starting point was immersing ourselves in God's love, claiming our identity as God's beloved. Ezekiel had a different starting point. He started with looking for someone to blame or something to blame when faced with unwanted pain, suffering, or evil. The good news is they both ended up at the same place, aware of God's covenant, eternal relationship with them. It's during Lent, the season leading up to Easter, that we take time to consider our starting point, how we respond to life's surprises, to unexpected moments, to unwanted moments. We have this opportunity to look within, to decide how we are going to be aware of God, no matter what we face. And so every week during Lent, we will be offering a way to deepen our awareness of God always with us. And I'm always interested in hearing about how groups or individuals are also deepening their awareness of God during this time. One of our small groups, the one that meets Thursday evenings at Pastor Chelsea and Nick's home, decided that instead of meeting every other week during Lent, they're going to meet every week as a commitment, as a way to be aware of their starting point as God's beloved. And so this week, I invite you to just be aware of the stories you tell yourself when unexpected things happen, whether they be mildly inconvenient or on the opposite end of the scale, things you see in the world around you that fill you with anxiety or fear or the sense that God is, or the illusion that God is not present. Where do we move to blame in our lives? I've decided in my own life, one of the places I most rapidly move towards blame and judgment and criticism of others is when I'm walking my dog and someone who has also walked on that path didn't pick up after their dog. It just, I can just go into oracles like Ezekiel about why those people should be blamed. So I have decided to carry those little plastic bags designed for that purpose. I have decided to carry those with me and pick them up as part of my Lenten practice, even if it's not my dog's output. Just as a way to be aware that I don't have to start with blame on the journey of life. And we have in the fellowship hall a paper that you can pick up that offers us a way to move into that this week, as it's from Pope Francis on Lenten fast suggestions. And these are the words he wrote. Fast from hurting words and say kind words. Fast from sadness and be filled with gratitude. Fast from anger and be filled with patience. Fast from pessimism and be filled with hope. Fast from worries and trust in God. Fast from complaints and contemplate simplicity. Fast from pressures and be prayerful. Fast from bitterness and fill your heart with joy. Fast from selfishness and be compassionate to others. Fast from grudges and be reconciled. Fast from words and be silent so that you can listen. Again, there are copies for people in the fellowship hall and the table to your right as you enter. But we have the opportunity this week to be aware of our starting points, no matter what we face, and to be willing to claim the truth that God is in a covenant relationship with us. God will always be our God. We will always be God's people. And carrying that awareness changes how we respond to the world, changes how we see each other, changes how we love each other. One of the ways we are aware of God's presence, no matter what else is happening in the world, is every week we light a peace candle, aware that we want to be the peace of God, and that to do that, we have to get a light. I think we'll activate Plan B. Is there a wand? Oh, I see it. We'll need this later anyway. So even if it takes extra effort, we every week light a peace candle so that we are persistent and we persevere in our prayers for peace around the world. We join with other faith communities throughout Livermore in doing this, knowing that together we have the power to be God's love in the world. So let mortal flesh, mortal fears be silent as we claim our covenant relationship with God. Now the Asbury Players will lead us